Ready?
Yeah.
Welcome to Cultural Anthropology. My granddaughter Rosie and I will be your instructors for this intense but hopefully satisfying intersession. You must have screwed up somewhere along the line as students, right, Rosie? Because why would they have to take a course during the intersession, particularly when there's so much to do during a pandemic? So what we're going to do is give you the basics of anthropology, and we're going to do that by starting off with 3 rather boring lectures. So we're going to share the screen now. If you could play this at a faster time, please do, because it's kind of boring, but let's get through it. Oh, I have a button here. Now we're going to go really fast, and this is how we're going to do it. And this should get you through all the basics. Oh, we can't do it that way. You got to learn stuff too. Introduction to Anthropology. This first of 3 YouTubes will show you the history in very brief form of anthropology, and will give you some of the keys to how we study things, and also let you know about some of the mistakes that we've made over time and how we're always progressing. Anthropology is the study of peoples in groups. And that differs, and we'll talk about this shortly, from the other social sciences that look at various other aspects of human beings. But notice there's an S under the word culture, which means even within a specific group of culture, you will see a variety. And that'll be your first assignment at the end, your next assignment rather, at the end of this PowerPoint. Anthropology differs from sociology, which is its mother and father. And that's the first lie I'm going to tell you, because that assumes a homogeneous, heteronormative background. And nothing is that in our own culture today or in the history of the social sciences. And the reality is that anthropology has a very horrible background. It emerged out of colonialism, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, other government agencies in the United States and Europe, churches that were oppressing peoples, and even corporations. And anthropologists, bluntly speaking, were used to control Native peoples, indigenous peoples, for the benefit of their employers, not for the benefit of the people. And this did not change until the 1970s and 60s, late 60s, early 70s. And anthropology really began in the 1870s. It differs from psychology, which studies individuals, history, which studies facts as interpreted by individuals, and facts should be in quote, economics, which looks at the mutual exchange of the goods, laws, which are the formalized customs. We look at formal and informal, arts, religious study, theology, and biology. They all have a part, and all are a part of anthropology. But together, anthropology uses them all in what is called the holistic method. The key to anthropology is really comparison and contrast with present and past cultures, and even existence, human and pre-human. And that's where we'll go. Here's the truth about me. I sometimes repeat myself. Ask my children. Anthropology is too often, as I said earlier, used by colonialism, and it studies minorities or lower class people. Why? Because we have had access to them, whereas upper class, the wealthy are insulated and will not be as susceptible to people coming in and examining their life. The first employers of anthropology were as government employees, colonial officers with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the CIA, museums, and missionaries. And this is not that much different than the history of social science, all of which were basically formed to support the establishment. Now, there were notable exceptions in anthropology and the other social sciences. So let's move on from this little. Remember the 1960s? Oh, come on, you weren't there. I was, though. Amen. It was wow. Oh, move on. Anyhow, in the 1960s, there was a social explosion. And there was protest about the war, about gender discrimination, about racial discrimination. But there was also a look by graduate students in particular at various professions. And one of the things that happened is a number of anthropology students were able to trace the funding of anthropologists to government organizations and how they were used specifically to oppress people. This was, the Vietnam War was going on in the 60s, and it was discovered that anthropologists were among those hired by the US government, not to help people, but to suppress them. So in a very explosive meeting in 1970, and I was there, at the American Anthropological Association, anthropology switched gears and now stated very clearly that our primary responsibility is to ensure the safety of people being studied. That means we don't expose them to the government. We don't expose them to other forces that could actually harm them. And that's something that is taken very, very seriously. At the same time, various other social sciences also developed a code of ethics. There's not, of course, a lot of memorization in a synchronous course, but there's some terms that you must know, and actually terms that you should be using correctly in your assignments, including the assignment that comes at the end of this lecture. The biggie, of course, is culture. Duh. This is a course in culture anthropology. Culture is a learned body of knowledge, norms, beliefs, arts, laws, morals, customs, and habits, which are symbolically shared and transmitted by members of a society and passed on from one generation to the next. And let's break this down. Learned. Culture is not instinctual. Even, you met my granddaughter earlier, even the way she laughed would be different in different cultures. We learn everything we know in culture. Knowledge, beliefs, art, laws, morals, they vary from culture to culture. Symbolic. A symbol is mutually agreed upon meaning within a specific culture. For example, in our culture, many people value the American flag as a symbol of freedom. If you go to other places around the world, they see the flag symbolically as a sign of oppression. Now, transmitted means that we pass it on from one generation to the next to members of a society. And culture is always changing. That's why your parents hate you. And because your culture is quite different than theirs. And that means it's dynamic rather than constant, dynamic rather than static. And again, this definition you'll be using in your assignments. There's also things that culture is not. As stated, it is not instinctual. We are born with nothing. We learn everything from our culture. Now, there's a big debate whether our personalities are a result of culture or genetics. And that's more of a debate that we will look at later. But again, we learn our culture. It is not universal. That has a double meaning. Meaning what we value in one culture or interpret one way in one culture will be interpreted a different way in a different culture. Your second reading deals with this specifically when an anthropologist tries to read Shakespeare to people in Western Africa, and their interpretation is totally different. So it's not universal that way, but even within a culture, we have more than one view, which gets us to the third point. No culture is homogeneous. There is distinct roles, not just between male and female, and in other cultures, in our culture too, Gender is much broader than male and female, but there are different roles within every culture. Want a glimpse into the future? You'll be using some of these terms as soon as you finish this slideshow. And I'm not going to give you that many, because if you knew all the anthropology terms I did, I would be out of a job. Okay, ethnography. You have a big, not so big, ethnography assignment at the end of the term. It'll also be, if you do it, the easiest grade you ever received. And an ethnography is an attempt to learn how members of other cultures and your own interpret the world. And you're going to do this one, this term, looking at your own culture. In course content, you'll see guidelines, but I'll give you more specific instructions on this. Ethnocentricity. Ethno meaning group, centric meaning yourself, is judging cultures by the values of your own beliefs rather than their beliefs. The opposite is cultural relativism, judging other cultures in the context of their own world. You're going to read things that might make you uncomfortable. You're going to read about a culture where one woman has 3 husbands. You're going to read about a culture where there's starvation, but they won't eat meat. We want you to understand these in the terms of those cultures rather than your own. But you don't have to accept that. That would be called absolute relativism. And we do intervene, and we do have a right to have our own opinions. Just a few more terms, and then we'll be done with them. Subjective, objective. Dr. Suri, don't you love it when I refer to myself in the third person? Makes me sound a little crazy. Dr. Suri has a very interesting voice. It is full of animation. That's a subjective opinion. It's how you view things. Objective would be something like Dr. Suri's voice doesn't go up or down many levels as measured by a voice machine. Subjective, it's really cold today. Objective is at 17 degrees. Now, when you're dealing with humans, as much as we in anthropology and the other social science try to be objective, we have to understand that we're going in there with our own biases, our own point of views. If you're really good this term, I'll show you some of my own subjective views when I did field work in Alaska, Canada, or some other place around the globe. Now, the key to anthropology is field work. That's when we go into the actual field and study people. And if you look at the bio of me that I put up, faculty information, you see that I've been fortunate enough to be in quite a few places. And field work. Ideally, field work should be for 1 year because it captures all seasons. That's sometimes very difficult. When we do field work, we cannot interview or observe everybody. So we have to pick what we call informants. These are gatekeepers to the community. And they really do provide our information. When you read your first article about Christmas in the Kalahari, I want you to pay specific information to the people that gave the anthropologist Richard Lee his information. Because by funneling information through them, he also was getting their biases, their own subjective views of their own culture. And when I do field work, I try to talk to children as much as I can. This is my son, Sam, on the left, who's now 35, and his friend Kelly, who is a Navajo Indian, I should say, when we were first in Alaska. Her family from the reservation and ours from New Jersey were working with indigenous people around issues of education. Kelly was one of my best informants about Navajo life, and I did a lot of work on Navajo reservations. I take classes there every other year. And I got more information out of Kelly than I did out of the adults. And we'll talk more about that later too. So, stop. I can't take it anymore. I need a break. I want you, though, to go to your discussion board and answer the question called dynamic culture. And then guess what? You could return for 2 more of these. But look at the goals for the section to see exactly when each should be done. Thank you. This will be the most boring one of them all, but the next 2 are a little boring, and then they get very interesting.